When people talk about switching to Linux, the conversation usually sounds like a fairy tale. It's free, it's fast, it's secure, it respects your privacy, and it's somehow the magical cure for everything that frustrates you about Windows or macOS. You hear phrases like, Linux just works, Linux gives you freedom, and once you switch, you'll never go back. But today, we're not here for the marketing slogans or the romanticized version of Linux that lives in comment sections and forums. Today, we're talking about the dark side of Linux, the part almost no one warns you about before you switch. The stuff you usually learn the hard way after you've already wiped your drive, installed a distro, and confidently told your friends that you're done with Windows forever. Let's start with the first shock most new Linux users experience, something that hits them within the first few hours, sometimes minutes, after installation. Choice overload. On Windows or macOS, there's basically one operating system. You install it, you use it, that's it. On Linux, the very first question you're asked is which distribution do you want? Ubuntu, Fedora, Debian, Arch, Mint, Pop! OS, Manjaro, OpenSUS, and hundreds more. Each distro claims to be the best for beginners, the best for developers, the most stable, the most cutting edge, or the most customizable. For a newcomer, this isn't empowering, it's paralyzing. You watch 10 videos, read 20 blog posts, and somehow end up more confused than when you started. Pick Ubuntu, and someone tells you it's bloated. Pick Arch, and someone says it's not for beginners. Pick Mint, and someone calls it boring. There is no single correct answer, and Linux culture often assumes you already know that, which can make new users feel lost and even stupid for asking. Then comes the installation process. Yes, Linux installers have improved massively over the years, but let's be honest, they're still not foolproof for everyone. Partitioning disks, choosing file systems, deciding whether to dual boot, worrying about secure boot, UEFI, legacy mode, and encryption. One wrong click and you can wipe your entire drive. Windows users are used to installers that actively protect them from themselves. Linux installers often assume you know what you're doing or that you're willing to learn by breaking things. For some people, that's exciting. For others, it's terrifying. Once you finally boot into your shiny new Linux desktop, the honeymoon phase begins. Everything feels fast, the desktop looks clean, there are no ads in the start menu. Your system isn't begging you to sign into an account, but slowly the cracks start to show. You go to install your favorite software, only to realize it doesn't exist for Linux. Adobe Photoshop, Illustrator, After Effects, Microsoft Office, with full compatibility, many industry-standard tools just aren't there. People will quickly tell you about alternatives. Use GIMP instead of Photoshop, Krita instead of Illustrator, LibreOffice instead of Microsoft Office. And yes, these tools are powerful. But here's the uncomfortable truth no one likes to admit. Alternatives are not replacements. They behave differently, they have different workflows, and if your job or studies depend on specific software, almost the same is often not good enough. This is where the famous phrase, Linux is not ready for the desktop, starts to make sense for some users. Not because Linux itself is bad, but because the world still runs on software built primarily for Windows and macOS. You can try to run Windows apps using compatibility layers like Wine or Proton, and sometimes it feels like magic when it works. But when it doesn't work, it really doesn't work. Random crashes, missing features, strange bugs, or performance issues with no clear solution. You'll find forum posts from 10 years ago describing the exact same problem, followed by replies saying this is a known issue or it works on my machine. And that brings us to one of the most frustrating parts of Linux life, troubleshooting. On Windows, when something breaks, you expect it to be annoying. But you also expect official support, error messages that at least try to explain the problem, and software vendors that take responsibility. On Linux, troubleshooting often means diving into forums, wikis, GitHub issues, and Reddit threads. You'll see terminal commands thrown at you like candy, commands that you're told to copy and paste without really understanding what they do. And if you ask a basic question, there's always a chance someone replies with, just read the manual, or this has been asked 1,000 times. Linux has an incredible community, but it also has a gatekeeping problem. Some parts of the community expect users to earn their place by suffering first. If you don't know how to use the terminal, you're told to learn it. If you don't understand how permissions work, you're told that Linux isn't for you. This attitude can be incredibly discouraging for people who just want a computer that works, not a computer science lesson every time something breaks. Hardware compatibility is another dark corner that rarely gets enough attention. Linux runs amazingly well on some hardware, especially older machines, but it can be a nightmare on others. Wi-Fi cards that don't work out of the box, Bluetooth that randomly disconnects, touchpads with missing gestures, printers that require obscure drivers or simply refuse to cooperate. On Windows, hardware manufacturers write drivers because that's where the market is. On Linux, driver support often depends on reverse engineering or community effort. Sometimes it works perfectly. Sometimes it doesn't work at all. And when it doesn't, the solution might involve compiling a driver from source, editing configuration files, or waiting for a future kernel update that may or may not fix the problem. Gaming is another area where Linux has improved a lot, but the dark side is still very real. Yes, thanks to Proton and Steam, thousands of Windows games now run on Linux, but not all of them. Anti-cheat systems often block Linux entirely. New game releases might take weeks or months to become playable, if they ever do. Performance can vary wildly. One update can make a game run better, the next can break it completely. If gaming is a major part of your life and you want zero friction, Linux still demands compromises. Then there's the update situation. Linux updates are usually praised as being safer and more transparent than Windows updates, and in many ways, that's true. But Linux updates can also break things. A kernel update can suddenly kill your Wi-Fi. A graphics driver update can leave you staring at a black screen. A library update can break an application that worked perfectly yesterday. The difference is that on Linux, fixing these issues often falls on you. Roll back the kernel, reinstall drivers, search logs, and hope you find a solution. For power users, this is manageable. For average users, it's exhausting. Let's talk about fragmentation, one of Linux's biggest strengths and weaknesses at the same time. Different desktop environments, different package managers, different init systems, different display servers. What works on Ubuntu might not work on Fedora. Instructions written for Arch might be useless on Debian. A tutorial from 2 years ago might already be outdated. This fragmentation gives Linux its flexibility, but it also means there is no single unified Linux experience. Developers have to target multiple systems, which is one reason many companies simply don't bother supporting Linux officially. Privacy and security are often used as selling points for Linux. And while Linux is generally more secure, it's not magically invincible. Misconfigured permissions, outdated software, and careless use of root privileges can still compromise a system. New users sometimes feel overconfident, thinking Linux makes them immune to malware or attacks. That false sense of security can be dangerous. Linux requires responsibility. You are given more power, but with that power comes more ways to mess things up. Another dark truth is that Linux demands time. Time to learn, time to customize, time to fix things. For some people, this is fun. It's a hobby. It's a passion. For others, it's a burden. Not everyone wants to spend their evening figuring out why their audio stopped working after an update. Not everyone wants to learn command line tools just to get basic functionality, and that's okay. But Linux culture sometimes treats this as a personal failure rather than a valid preference. There's also the professional reality. Many workplaces require specific software, VPNs, or security tools that either don't support Linux or work poorly on it. You might love Linux at home, but be forced to use Windows or macOS for work. Dual booting sounds like a solution until you realize how annoying it is to constantly switch environments and maintain to systems. And finally, there's the identity trap. Some Linux users start tying their sense of intelligence or superiority to their operating system choice. They mock Windows users. They dismiss macOS users. They turn Linux into a personality trait. This can create unrealistic expectations for newcomers and a hostile environment for anyone who struggles. Linux is a tool, not a badge of honor. When that perspective is lost, the community suffers. So is Linux bad? No, Linux is powerful, flexible, and incredibly important to the modern world. It runs servers, supercomputers, smartphones, and embedded systems everywhere. But the desktop Linux experience is not the utopia it's often portrayed as. It comes with trade-offs, frustrations, and responsibilities that many people are never warned about. The dark side of Linux isn't that it's broken or unusable. The dark side is the gap between expectation and reality. If you go into Linux thinking it will solve all your problems, you'll be disappointed. If you go into Linux understanding that it's different, that it requires patience, learning, and compromise, you might absolutely love it. Switching to Linux should be a choice made with open eyes, not blind hype. And if after trying it, you decide it's not for you, that doesn't mean you failed. It just means you chose the right tool for your needs. And that, more than anything, is the truth no one tells you before switching.